What happens when the world's most disciplined royal finally breaks her silence? Not with anger, not with emotion, but with something far more dangerous: evidence. For years, we've watched the headlines, we've heard the interviews, we've seen the tears, and we've been told a story of a woman trapped inside a cold institution, silenced by tradition, crushed by protocol. It's a story that spread like wildfire because it touched something we all recognize: the fear of being powerless against a system too big to fight. But what if that story wasn't the whole truth? What if behind the carefully crafted narrative, behind the emotional confessions and the polished media appearances, there was something else happening? Something calculated, something documented, something that the palace has been holding back until now. This isn't about gossip. This isn't about taking sides in a royal family drama. This is about what happens when evidence collides with narrative, when footage replaces feelings, when the person who stayed silent the longest finally decides that silence is no longer protection, it's permission. Princess Anne has stepped forward, and what she's brought with her isn't a rebuttal, it's a case file. And once you see what's inside, the story you thought you knew starts to look very different. Because the most effective lies aren't the ones that sound false, they're the ones that sound exactly like what we want to believe. And for years we believed, until now. California mornings have a particular kind of quiet, the kind that feels earned, designed, controlled. For Meghan, that morning was supposed to be no different. The world outside moved at her pace now. No protocols, no eyes watching from behind palace walls, no staff reporting every movement upward through a chain of command that never ended. She had won, or so it seemed. The interviews had landed. The deals were in motion. The narrative was hers to shape, hers to sell, hers to turn into something permanent. A brand built on bravery, a platform built on pain. And the royal family? They were exactly where she needed them, silent, distant, unable to contradict her without looking like the villains she'd already painted them to be. That was the plan. Control the story, control the timeline, make every question about them, not her. Turn every silence into an admission of guilt. Turn every criticism into proof of persecution. It was working. The world was listening. The world was believing. Then her phone started buzzing. Once, twice, then again and again with that relentless rhythm that makes your stomach tighten before you even read the first word. Outside, the noise began. Not the usual hum of a quiet neighborhood. Voices, urgent. Overlapping, the unmistakable sound of a crowd that had come for one reason: a statement. Meghan's first reaction wasn't panic, it was confusion, because confusion is what you feel when the reality you built inside suddenly stops matching what's happening outside. How did they find out? What do they know? Why are they here? Her publicist called, and the voice on the other end wasn't the usual calm, professional tone. It was shaken. The kind of fear professionals try very hard not to show because fear is contagious. Turn on the television, now. She opened her laptop, found the headline, and there it was, cold and unforgiving. Princess Anne's documentary exposes untold secrets behind palace walls. This wasn't a tabloid hit piece. This was the BBC. This was institutional weight. This was the one platform she couldn't easily dismiss as hostile media or royal propaganda. And leading it wasn't some distant commentator. It was Princess Anne herself, the woman who never speaks, the woman who never engages, the woman who has spent decades perfecting the art of silence. Until now. Then came the second blow. An email. Subject line: termination of cooperation agreement. That wasn't just bad news, that was corporate panic, that was legal teams retreating. That was the kind of fallout that happens when something in a documentary isn't merely embarrassing, it's operationally dangerous. The kind of dangerous that makes billion-dollar corporations cut ties before the public even finishes watching. Meghan called her publicist back, her voice sharp now, almost offended, as if reality had broken a rule. What the hell is going on? The answer came quickly and it changed everything. She has proof, and it's all public now. Big proof. That single word carries weight in a way opinions never can, because proof doesn't argue, proof doesn't negotiate, proof doesn't care about your trauma or your tears or the fog of public debate. Proof just sits there cold and still, waiting for the moment someone presses play. And that moment had arrived. The documentary doesn't waste time. It moves straight into the palace, into a corridor most people will never see, toward a door most people don't know exists, a restricted archive. A place where private letters, personal recordings, and fragments of history are kept under lock and key. Not because they're scandalous, because they're sacred, This particular archive is connected to Princess Diana, and inside the royal family, anything linked to Diana isn't just memory, it's volatile ground. It's emotion, legacy, and pain all tangled together, which is why access to it is tightly controlled, which is why the door is never supposed to be open, which is why what happened next matters so much. According to a palace staff member, a man who has served for decades and whose testimony carries the weight of someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose, the door was open that day and someone was inside. He describes the scene carefully, almost reluctantly. He wasn't looking for drama. He was doing his job, walking the corridor, when he noticed the door slightly ajar. Protocol demanded it stay locked. Curiosity, or perhaps instinct, made him look inside. And there she was, Meghan, alone, kneeling in front of a locked box, her back turned, her hands busy, moving with the kind of focused urgency that suggests someone who knows they're running out of time. The staff member froze, unsure whether to speak or retreat. Then he saw what she was holding. A paper clip, straightened, thin, bent at the tip. The kind of improvised tool you use when you're trying to force something open that was never meant to be opened. Not a key, not permission, a tool, and tools imply intent. Before he could say anything, Princess Anne arrived. Anne doesn't raise her voice often. Those who know her describe her as someone who avoids confrontation unless the alternative is worse. But in that moment, she didn't hesitate. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "What do you think you're doing?" Meghan turned, startled, and then, according to Anne's account, something remarkable happened. The panic disappeared, the confusion melted away. In its place, tears, instant, convincing, practiced. And then Meghan pointed, not at herself, at the staff member standing in the doorway. He was trying to break into the box. I was trying to stop him. Let that sink in for a moment. Because this isn't just deflection. This is something far more calculated. In that single instant, Meghan didn't just deny responsibility. She weaponized innocence. She took a loyal employee, someone with decades of service and no public profile, and turned him into the villain of her story. She tried to destroy him to save herself. It's a move that reveals something far more dangerous than curiosity or entitlement. It reveals strategy, and strategy, when deployed against the powerless, is cruelty. Anne didn't accept it. She couldn't, because she had seen it. She had seen who was kneeling. She had seen who held the paperclip. And she refused to let the accusation stand. "I watched it happen," Anne said, her voice cold and final. "I know exactly what I saw." Then she did something that changed the entire trajectory of what came next. She ordered security to pull the footage. Every camera, every corridor, every angle, immediately. Because once CCTV enters the equation, the story stops being about who sounds more believable. It becomes about who is recorded. And recordings, unlike memories, don't lie. If the archive was about physical intrusion, then what happened at Balmoral was about something far more insidious, the theft of trust. Balmoral is not a public stage, it's a private retreat. A place where the royal family can exist without cameras, without protocol, without the exhausting performance of being constantly watched. An afternoon tea with the late Queen was as private as it gets. These moments weren't just personal, they were sacred. The only spaces where a woman who spent her entire life on display could simply be human. Meghan was invited. She behaved perfectly, attentive, respectful, warm. She listened closely. She nodded at the right moments. She smiled with the appropriate warmth. She reacted with that soft, emotional tone that signals empathy. Everything you would expect from someone genuinely honored to be there. But Princess Anne, sitting nearby, noticed something off. Not in Meghan's words, not in her facial expressions. In her positioning, the way her handbag sat, the way her phone rested face down on the table, the way her body angled just slightly toward it, as if protecting it from view. And then Anne saw it, a faint red glow, reflected briefly in the polished surface of the tea set, small, easy to miss, but unmistakable to anyone who understands what it means. Recording, active. Anne didn't confront Meghan in front of the Queen. That restraint matters. It shows discipline. It shows that Anne's priority wasn't humiliation, it was containment. She refused to turn a private meeting into a scene, so she did something subtle instead. Something that looked accidental but was anything but. She tipped her teacup, just slightly, just enough to shift the table. The phone moved. The red indicator became visible, undeniable. Meghan grabbed it immediately, shut it down, And then almost instantly she smiled. Not a nervous smile, a practiced smile. The expression of someone who believes she can disarm a threat with charm. Her explanation arrived quickly, polished and sweet. I just wanted to remember the Queen's words. They were so meaningful, so wise, so difficult to remember perfectly. It sounded reasonable, it sounded innocent, it sounded like the kind of thing someone might do out of admiration. Anne didn't argue. She didn't need to. She just stared. A long, cold, steady gaze that communicated one thing without a single word. I understand exactly what you're doing, and I don't believe you, but the story doesn't end there. Because later that day, as Meghan walked through one of Balmoral's long, quiet corridors, she made a mistake. She thought she was alone. She thought the space was private. She thought no one was listening. And she spoke on her phone, animated, confident, almost giddy with excitement. I've got it, she said, her voice bright with satisfaction. We can cut it up, edit it, shape it exactly how we need to. This is perfect. Princess Anne was there, she heard it, and she wasn't alone. Her son, Peter, was with her. 2 witnesses, 2 people who understood in that instant that the tea room recording wasn't about remembering advice, it was about collecting ammunition. Because a recorded private voice can be rearranged. A sentence can be isolated. A pause can be removed. Emotion can be reframed. Meaning can be inverted. A human voice, once captured, can be made to say almost anything when the editor's motive is not truth, but leverage. Anne stepped out of the shadows. Her voice was calm, but the authority in it was unmistakable. Meghan, stop. Her tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the voice of someone who has already made a decision and is simply delivering the outcome. Meghan turned, startled. And then she tried the same strategy that had worked before. She softened. She smiled. She shifted into the tone of someone offering polite compliance, as if this were all just a misunderstanding between family members. Anne cut through it immediately. Within these walls, privacy is sacred. Recording the Queen without consent is not a misunderstanding. It's a betrayal of trust. And depending on how it's interpreted, certain laws could view this in the most serious terms. Meghan's face changed. The charm disappeared. In its place, defensiveness, outrage, victimhood on command. I'm being targeted, she said, her voice trembling now. I'm being suppressed because I'm an outsider. I only admired her. I only wanted to remember her words. Anne didn't engage. She didn't argue about feelings or fairness, or whether Meghan felt welcomed. She simply stated the boundary, clear and final. I've said what needed to be said. And then she walked away, firm, final, leaving Meghan standing alone in that corridor, realizing for the first time that the palace wasn't just going to stay silent forever. Meghan didn't wait. She couldn't. Because once you realize evidence might surface, the only defense is to flood the space with a different story first. Speak before they do. Define the narrative before they can. Make your version so loud, so emotional, so widely repeated that any later contradiction looks like retaliation. Within hours, the leaks began. Not through official palace channels, through media activists, through friendly outlets, through voices that would amplify her story without questioning it, without verifying it, without asking for proof. The narrative was simple, devastatingly effective, and familiar. The palace was toxic. The environment was oppressive. Staff were conspiring, loyalties were weaponized, and at the center of it all was Princess Anne, cold, controlling, hostile, using her influence to make life unbearable. Meghan didn't just complain. She turned it into a product, a streaming series, a podcast, a documentary of her own, a truth campaign. Because products create permanence. They turn allegations into content. Content becomes narrative. Narrative becomes memory. And memory, repeated often enough, becomes accepted truth. For a while it worked. Headlines multiplied. Commentators repeated the claims as if repetition itself was verification. Social media exploded into tribal warfare. The public demanded statements. Advisors panicked. And the palace, as always, responded slowly, cautiously, legally, trapped in their own restraint. And Meghan watched it all, knowing that chaos was useful because chaos creates fog. Fog obscures details. And details are where evidence lives. But Princess Anne understood something Meghan didn't. Speed wins short battles. Patience wins long wars. So Anne waited. Not because she was afraid, not because she didn't have the evidence, because she was strategic. She knew that if she released footage and testimony too early, it would be buried under Meghan's emotional momentum. It would be dismissed as an attack. It would be framed as cruelty. So she let Meghan speak. She let her repeat the story. She let her build an entire brand on it. She let her commit so fully that her reputation, her deals, her future credibility were all tied to the narrative she'd constructed. And then, when Meghan had no more cards to play, when she had gone all in, Anne moved, not with an interview, not with a statement, with a dossier. The documentary doesn't just make claims, it shows them. Security footage from the archive corridor. Clear. Time-stamped. Undeniable. Meghan entering the restricted space. Alone. Uninvited. Witness testimony from the staff member she accused. His voice is quiet, reluctant, but steady. He describes what he saw, he describes the paperclip. He describes the moment she pointed at him and lied. Audio from the corridor at Balmoral. Meghan's voice, bright with confidence, discussing how to cut and edit the Queen's words into something usable. Statements from two female palace employees who describe being manipulated, told separately that the other was criticizing them, turned against each other in a way that manufactured the very toxicity Meghan would later claim to be escaping. And then the documentary plays two audio clips side by side. The first, Meghan's voice, trembling, describing fear and suppression inside the palace, her tone fragile, vulnerable, desperate. The second, Meghan's voice in the corridor, confident and calculating, discussing strategy, editing, leverage. The contrast is devastating. Because it doesn't ask the audience to choose who to believe, it asks them whether they can ignore what they've just heard with their own ears. Princess Anne doesn't gloat. She doesn't celebrate. She simply states the conclusion in the same measured tone she's used throughout. The public has been told a story, but a story is not the same as the truth, and the truth, in this case, is documented. Within hours, the fallout begins. Not just headlines, contracts, platforms, brands, partnerships dissolving. The kind of corporate retreat that happens when association becomes risk, when supporting someone stops being brave and starts being liability. Because in the end, the documentary's power isn't in its drama, it's in its receipts. And receipts, unlike narratives, don't bend. They don't negotiate. They don't care about trauma language or the fog of public debate. They just exist. Cold, still. Waiting for someone to finally press play. This isn't about whether you like Meghan or Anne. It's not about choosing sides in a family feud. It's about what happens when a story, no matter how emotionally compelling, no matter how widely believed, runs into evidence. And when that collision happens, only one thing survives. Not the loudest voice, not the most sympathetic story, not the most polished performance, the documented one. Because in a world built on narratives, the only thing more powerful than a perfect story is a single, undeniable fact. And Princess Anne just delivered an entire file of them.